Hey Mama, welcome to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Michelle Gibbs, wife, mama of 3, and doctor of the PhD kind. On this podcast, we talk honestly about high achievement, burnout, and what it looks like to lead well across home, work, and self. So if you're an ambitious mother scholar who's quietly exhausted by the pace you've been keeping and starting to realize that survival isn't the same as success, this podcast is for you. Mrs. Mummy PhD began during my own PhD journey as a wife and mama. Today, as a postdoctoral scholarly mama working across 2 leadership roles, this work has evolved. It's no longer just about finishing the PhD well, it's about creating sustainable ways of learning, leading, and living at any stage of your journey without losing yourself in the process. If you're ready to move from survival to restoration, you're in the right place. Let's begin. These are our journeys of becoming. Hey Mama, welcome back to the Mrs. Mummy PhD podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, if you've not subscribed, please do subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now, I have been on break for this podcast for a couple of weeks, or a few weeks actually. And the reason for that is because I'm in the process of adjusting to my new schedule, which I am absolutely delighted about. But what it's meant is that I really needed the time to just settle into that and just give myself space to not have to show up anywhere for anyone. So that's the reason for the break. It's been very intentional and it has been absolutely wonderful. So what I want to speak to in this episode is I want to speak to the mother scholar who's exhausted, who's not just a little bit tired, but literally running on empty type of exhausted. The one who has been told and also tells herself that this is just what it costs to do what she does. So literally this is just the way it is. This is the reality of it. Like there's nothing that she can do to change anything. I want to speak to that mother scholar. The one whose days feel like this relentless cycle of absolute obligation and just no space to look after herself. And she's quietly wondering, is this just my life now? Is this just the way it's going to be? Is it going to be permanently like this? I remember when I was pregnant with our second son, I had this awful condition during that pregnancy. And I was told that it would go away just as soon as I delivered. And it, I had all these hives all over my body and it was just really awful, very itchy and irritable. And after I had him, even after 3 months, I still literally had the hives and the itching and all of that. And I remember thinking to myself, is this it? Is this going to be my life permanently? And of course, I'd watched my dad live with food allergies for many, many years. Very, very difficult situation to have dealt with. But I thought, oh my gosh, is this going to be my life? Am I going to literally be scratching and itching and breaking out in hives all the time for the rest of my life? So when you've been suffering through something for such a long time, I think it naturally begins to feel like this is just the way it is. This is just the way it's going to be for the foreseeable. And so I'm speaking to that mama who's in that kind of overwhelmed, overstretched routine that is beginning to feel normal. It's beginning to feel like that's going to be just the way it is for a while. And so by the end of this episode, you would have heard 4 of the most common beliefs that are keeping you locked and stuck in survival mode. And you will have a new way to kind of think about each one. You'll start to see that the walls that you thought were fixed and couldn't change might actually have doors, might actually be able to be changeable, to be opened, to lead somewhere else. And the shift that I hope this episode will help you to make is to move from I can't to I haven't done it yet. The power of yet. And the empowerment that comes with that belief that actually maybe I can actually do something about this. Maybe this isn't the way it needs to be. And so before we get into that, as I said, we have been on a break. We've been on a deliberate, intentional break from the podcast. And not because something went wrong or, this was like another cycle of burnout, but because I just decided, I made the decision that this was necessary and that I wanted to take a break. So I hope that you have enjoyed the pause, that you've enjoyed the break yourself, whatever season of life you're in. That's exactly what today is about. It's about coming back from that intentional pause. Let us keep this conversation going. So, like I said, this podcast is for the mother scholar who is high achieving, very committed, but deep inside, things feel misaligned and they're falling apart, right? This is for the mother scholar that loves her work. She also loves her family. She doesn't want to quit her career or walk away from it, but she's losing herself somewhere in between all of this. She's thought about pulling back, but then she's reminded of 1,000 reasons why she cannot pull back. But also, there's another type of mother scholar who may also be listening to this episode and thinking, is this for me? So that mother scholar, she's never even let herself desire to have more time because she feels like wanting that feels selfish. Like she is going to be making a huge sacrifice that is going to contribute to pressures in other places and other areas of her life. And so she's never even entertained the thought of choosing herself because she has managed through the burnout. She has managed to keep everything going, to do it all and to keep things moving. And so why on earth would she challenge that? Why would she do otherwise, right? I care about this and I care about mamas like you who are listening to this episode and thinking, gosh, I see myself in that. I really resonate with that because I am her. I am you. I have been you. And I've recently made my own kind of self-leadership decision to cut my hours back, to give myself some much needed space. And I think that journey is easy to look at that and assume that that was an easy decision, but it actually was not. It was not an easy decision, but it was an act of self-leadership. And it has changed the way that I have been navigating this season of life now. So, like I said, I know this story very, very well, very familiar with this journey, because I know what it feels like to build a story in your brain about why you can't afford to step back, why you can't afford to slow down. And I know the mental gymnastics of being a high achieving mama, right? Calculating, justifying, overthinking, negotiating with yourself. And I know what it feels like when you finally stop and realize that the cost of not stopping, the cost of not slowing down was actually higher all along. You just didn't realize it. And so today I want to speak into some of the stories that kept me stuck and some of the stories that I hear again and again from so many high achieving mamas. And so these are real experiences and real thoughts that we have, and they feel like facts, they feel real. But that's, I think, what really makes an episode like this so important. So let's kind of break this all down. So why does this even happen to us as high achieving mamas? Why is this such a common experience to feel this sense of overwhelm, but still push through, this fear around, stepping back? Why does this feel so common? I think it's because we exist in systems. So when I say systems, I'm referring to things like societal structures and systems, including academia or your professional leadership life or in motherhood, that are really designed to take from us and not replenish us. And it's fine to give of yourself. It's fine to be committed to things that matter to you, like your career, like your motherhood journey, like your relationships. It's fine to be committed to those things and show up for those things. But the challenge is that we are trained to equate worth with output. We are trained to equate presence with availability. And we are trained to associate rest with weakness. That somehow, if we take a step back, if we decide to choose ourselves, that we are giving up. We are not giving of our best. Because nobody has given any of us a manual for being a good mom or being a successful, career-driven, high-achieving mom. Like, nobody's given us a script or a manual, an instruction manual for this life. This is the sort of journey that you learn as you go along. Like, you are literally building the plane while you're flying it. And so a lot of thoughts come along with that when we exist in these systems. And the thoughts are, I think, really driven by feelings of guilt and shame and not wanting to be seen as not being committed. I can't reduce my hours. If I do, I'm going to fall behind. I'm going to lose money. I'm going to lose opportunities. There's just not enough time. I'll deal with that when things slow down, when I achieve the next milestone, when I, get to this stage of my career, then I can kind of take a step back. Or I can't step back because everything depends on me. Everybody needs me. What's going to happen if I don't show up? What's going to happen if I cut back? What's going to happen if I'm not available? And if I'm not available, that means I'm not committed. So that's surely something I need to avoid, because I can't have people thinking that I'm not committed to my career, to my responsibilities. And it makes sense because these beliefs are not irrational. They are learned. They are, ingrained in us. They're reinforced, and often they are rewarded. People who show up all the time, people who are available all the time, who are, more visually present, they may be the ones to get the opportunities. They may be the ones that people look at as being super committed. And you, who's trying to cut back and adjust things a bit so that you can show up for other areas of your life that matter, you're the one that's seen as not being committed and not being serious. And in some of these academic and professional spaces, that kind of giving of ourselves beyond, our capacity, like this kind of martyrdom, gets mislabeled as dedication. That, we can always count on her. She's always going to show up because guess what? She believes that if she doesn't, she's not worth anything, right? Because that's tied to her worth. And as mums, we also absorb this messaging that sacrifice is it. It's a job. It's what's expected. Like we should give of ourselves to our children. We should give of ourselves to our family and have nothing left. And it makes complete sense that so many of us have adopted these beliefs and actually, embody these beliefs. Because yes, there are times where they can be true. There are times where you do want to show up for things. There are times where you do want to go for those opportunities. There are times where you do want to be visible. But the question I think that we all need to kind of settle with ourselves is whether those thoughts and those beliefs are serving us in the current season of life that we're in. And I feel like this is the reality that nobody really talks about, that you working to the point of burnout and you getting yourself into a state of burnout is not making anything easier for anyone. It actually makes everything harder. You work slower. You are potentially costing yourself in ways that you're not even paying attention to. You're not resting. You're just in this constant state of recovery. And the version of you that is running on empty, that is doing the most, that is, just in this constant overexhausted state, that is not your best self. This is not your most effective self. It's not your most present self. in any area of your life, in any of those areas, whether it's career, motherhood, relationships, marriage, none of those areas will get the best version of you when you are in a constant state of overexhaustion. And I think for scholarly mamas particularly, it's the intellectual and emotional labor stacks that we are carrying. So the research, the planning, the potentially, if you are in this position, fixed term contracts, you're constantly looking for the next opportunity. It's the emotional load at home. It's the invisible mental load, like all the things that you've got to do, the long to-do list that you're juggling, all the admin, home admin, work admin, all that stuff that needs to be done. If you're managing a team, you're looking out for your, team members as well and making sure you're planning ahead for them, and make sure that you're not just being a manager, but you're actually being a leader. You're setting an example for the other members of your team. And there's no part of your life when you are living in a state of overexhaustion and burnout that switches off, right? That gets this kind of like, who are you when you're not juggling so many things? Who are you when you're not stressed? Who are you when you are actually calm and collected and reflective and joyful and optimistic about the future? Who are you when you are not in this constant state of burnout? And that's the challenge, that you are giving everyone a depleted version of you. So even though you may be showing up, you may be available, you may be solving all these problems, it's a depleted version of you that's doing that. And that is not sustainable. So what if, and this is just a gentle reframe that I want to offer you at this stage, what if the most responsible thing you can do for your work, for yourself, for your family, was to actually restore her? The version of you that was lost before all of this stuff took over. What if that was the most responsible thing? What if reclaiming your time, energy, and frankly, your life wasn't self-indulgent, but it was actually strategic? It was actually a sensible move to make. Maybe you might actually realize that these beliefs that you've been holding on to as facts might actually just be stories that you've told yourself for so long that you started to believe them. And you don't have to keep them. If they're just stories, just thoughts, you do not have to keep them. You can change them. My sons and I, we have this thing where I talk about the 3 C's. And I think I've spoken about this on this podcast before, like a few years back, about this 3C framework where we call things out, as in emotions, thoughts, we call them out, we challenge them. And if they're not serving us, we change them. And so this is the strategy that I'm going to suggest to you as well. If you've been, as you listen to the thoughts I'm going to share that were keeping me stuck, if you feel like, actually, I'm going to name those. I've been having those thoughts too. And I'm going to challenge them. What evidence do I have that those things are true? And if I cannot find any evidence that those things are true, I'm willing to change those thoughts. And that has been really helpful. Of course, I'm not saying that you have to do that, but if you choose to, if you find it helpful, call them out, challenge them, change them. I want to talk about these 4 myths. There are others, I'm sure, but these are the ones that have come to mind for me today. So I want to talk about the 4 myths that are keeping you stuck. When I say the 4 myths keeping you stuck, for me, a myth is just a half-baked truth that if we're not careful, we can calcify that into truth, into real truth, into certain truth, into certainty, right? And while sometimes myths can feel logical, they make sense, they can feel protective, they can feel like responsible. For me, when I look at them closely, when I examine, especially the 4 I'm going to share today, when I examine them really closely, I realized that they were just fake boundaries, fake walls that I can actually remove if I choose to. And for me, this is a distinction between a fact and a myth, a belief that you have never challenged, you've never questioned, you've just assumed this thing to be true. And there's a difference between what your reality is right now in this state of exhaustion and doing the most, and the only possible reality. So you may be thinking, well, this is the truth. This is just the way it is. This is the way it's always been. This is just the way it is. This is how we go. Like I've heard so many people say, like, of course we work 7 days a week. That's what we do. Or, of course I work on the weekend. Like that's standard. Of course I do that. Actually, but who said you had to do that? Where did that belief come from? Or is that somebody's half-baked reality that they've tried to impose on you? Is there no way of achieving success without having to sacrifice myself in the process of that, give up time with my family, give up time to just rest my mind? Is that the cost of success? Because if it is, it's too expensive for me. I can't afford that. And this matters now because you are tired. So you may be asking, why should I even care about this right now? Why does it matter whether this is a myth or a truth, or like, what does it matter? It matters because you are tired. And tired people don't have the bandwidth to question assumptions. So I'm going to do some of that questioning with you today, right? So that you can start to see not just walls and not just assumptions and not just beliefs that have never been challenged, but you can start to see options and possibilities. So what we're not going to be doing today, I am not telling you to quit your job, quit your career, start over, reinvent yourself. I'm not suggesting any of those things. I am inviting you, though, to examine the stories that have been keeping you from reclaiming even some of your time and energy. So we're going to be talking about these 4 myths with a little question to sit with after each one. So this isn't the first myth, but I want to just speak to the pattern of where I came to a point where I literally looked at my calendar and I just asked myself, whose life is this? What is this? No gaps, back to back to back. And feeling so stressed on Sunday nights, thinking, oh, another week of this like chocker-blocked schedule. Like every hour allocated, every margin filled in, it feels efficient because you've got a plan for everything. But I was disappearing in this schedule. Where was there time for me to recharge my own self? Right? And the story that I kept telling myself is that this is the cost of, you've got to push yourself. Post PhD, come on, like you should be doing more. You should be doing more. That this is the price that we have to pay for success. And what this looked like in reality, yes, the schedule looked all efficient and well planned out and color-coded, but what it really looked like beneath the bonnet, if you will, is a sense of tiredness and just exhaustion that you would just wake up tired. Even sleep couldn't fix that because you would just wake up feeling stressed the moment you open your eyes. I remember thinking I would open my eyes and literally have no clue of what day it was. And of course, I'm working across 2 roles. So I'm having to do that code switch between my roles as well during the week. And I just felt like, what is this really? I've just woken up from sleeping and I've gotten a pretty substantial amount of sleep. Why do I feel tired? Why do I still feel exhausted? The moments that I had with my kids where I was thinking about all the things I needed to just get on with that day, that next week, for example, this week, if it was the Sunday night, like all the things I needed to do just weighed my shoulders down with so much pressure that just wouldn't go away. And this was work that I was really proud of. I was proud of the changes I was making, the impact that I was having, but I was exhausted by it. It was costing me something that I actually hadn't even admitted to myself. And the result of that, or the realization that I came to, was that I started to ask myself, what if I reduced my hours? And the first thing that came to my mind was fear, right? Not just one fear, lots of fears. And they sounded suspiciously like those very convincing myths. And when I examined them closely, I realized that I'd never actually challenged them. I just believed them to be true. And what became clear to me was that reducing my hours wasn't the risk. Not reducing them was the risk. And the decision, when I finally came to it, did not, life didn't stop. Work didn't stop. The world didn't end. Nothing broke. But I created space. Space for better thinking, space for more presence, space for more of me. I can actually show up where it mattered to me. Going to the park with my kids and thoroughly remembering every single moment of us being there. That for me is what presence brings. When you are present in those moments, the memories, the amazing connections that can happen. That's really the cost when you are choosing not to lead yourself first. And this question, the question that this raises is, what stories are you holding on to as facts right now that you've never actually challenged? Not once have you thought to challenge any of these beliefs that you're holding on to. And I'm sharing this not to say that my path is yours or my journey is your journey or the decisions that I made for myself, you need to make those decisions, because that is not the case. Everybody's situation is different and unique. And what I choose in my life may not work for you in yours. But here's the thing. I know what it is to be afraid of your own freedom. And I know that that fear is almost always louder than the actual consequence of not making a decision for yourself. So let's get into the 4 myths. Let's break them down one by one. The first one is that time equals money. And I know that probably sounds a bit strange to say. And I think it's one of the things that we hear growing up all the time, that time equals money. Time is money, right? And what that then creates, that thinking, what it creates in our minds is the myth that our hours are tied to our value. That how many hours we show up equals how much we are worth. And this is a story that we absorbed potentially from childhood, growing up, thinking time is money, time is money. But the questions to sit with are, what kind of hours are we actually talking about here? What kind of hours? Are we talking about survival hours? Are we talking about hours where we could be energized, creative, be able to get into focused thinking, reflection? Like, what kind of hours are we really talking about here? The other question is your value really measured in your time? Or is it in your critical thinking, your expertise, your growth, your presence? How do you actually measure your value? And here's where I had to make the shift. Burnt out hours are not the same as productive hours. Just because you are busy does not mean that you are productive. Instead, this is is very expensive hours dressed up as effort and FaceTime. And I think particularly as mother scholars, the shift for me came when I realized that I am not an hourly paid worker. I'm not somebody who's showing up for a certain number of hours in order to translate that into some kind of value. My real value is in my capacity to think critically, to think deeply, to lead myself and others, to contribute to impact. That is where my value is. And my capacity, it requires care and intention. So the hours that you protect often produce more than the hours you grind. There's a lot of expectation around the grind and pushing ourselves beyond our capacity. For what? Because when you protect your capacity, when you protect some of those hours, you are able to produce way more than just hourly, time on task. Because this is way more than that. This is our work is value. Our worth actually is valued way beyond time on task. And I think particularly as we are talking about time not being equal, time and money, my belief is that time is not money, actually. I had to really change my thinking around this. Time is not money. Time is capacity. And capacity is everything. I remember listening to Myron Golden talking about something very similar to this, talking about time not being equal to money. And he used a really powerful analogy. And that analogy was, if I gave you, I can't remember the amount he said, but let's just say if I give you $1 million or pounds, if I offer that to you, would you take it? You would probably say, yes, I would take it. And yeah, I probably would say yes too, right? No strings attached. I'm just going to give you this £1 million or dollars or whatever. You would probably say yes. However, if I told you that if you took this money, you would not be able to live tomorrow, you would probably say no thanks. I would say no thanks. And what that tells me is that time is worth more than money. Time has more value than money. So reducing your hours is not shrinking your impact. It can actually be the very thing that expands your impact, that makes you more impactful. So the question to think about here and to sit with is, where did I actually learn? Or where did I get that belief from that time is equal to money and that my worth is measured in hours? Has that belief genuinely been serving me? For me, the answer was actually, no, it hasn't been serving me. And so I had to change it. I called it out. I challenged it. Where did I get this belief from? Do I have any evidence that that's true? No. Well, then I'm going to change that thought. Which brings us to the second myth, one that sounds like a practical challenge, a practical problem, but it's actually something else entirely. And this second myth is, I don't have time. And for me, all that translates to, I don't have time, all that translates to is a decision without a date. I don't have time is the most common thing you hear everyone talking about. Of course, as a busy mother scholar, as a busy leader or professional, like, of course, it feels like, oh my goodness, where's the time going? And so you hear everybody say, I don't have time, I don't have time, I don't have time. And it's probably the most common phrase in every high achieving mama's vocabulary. It feels like a fact. It feels real. I look at my schedule and I see it fully booked out. Of course I don't have time. It feels like something that's just happening to you, like you have no control over this. But here is the uncomfortable truth. In most cases, that is not actually true. That is not the fact. It's just that a decision has not yet been made to create that time. And so changing our mindset from time being this scarce resource that we never have enough of, what if we changed that? What if we flipped that script and actually believed that we did have the capacity to create time and that time can be abundant? What if we change our thinking in that way? Because when you're thinking that you don't have time, what this actually looks like in reality is that you will find the time when something becomes non-negotiable. When there's a deadline, when there's a health crisis, you hear so many people talk about all of a sudden, like, I suddenly realize what really matters. All of a sudden, these really busy people who never had time before can suddenly create time. If you are working and your school or nursery or something, they call and say, actually, your child has been unwell, you need to come immediately, there's been an emergency, trust me, you will find the time, you'll drop everything and you'll go. So in those moments, the diary is movable, right? You can drop things at a drop of a hat and you can show up where you need to. Things can get cancelled, space can suddenly appear, which means the time was always there. It's just that you hadn't made the decision to make creating that space a priority. The priority is not there. So I want you to notice when you say I don't have time, ask yourself, do I not have time? Or is it that I haven't committed a date to this decision? Because vague intentions do not survive Scully Mama schedules. Vague intentions, they don't work. You need decisions and dates. You need to actually put a date on things. Otherwise, it is not going to happen. So how can you start small? What is the one thing that you keep saying you're going to do when things calm down, when things get easier? What would happen if you actually put a date in your diary this week to actually do that thing? Or how could doing that thing become easier when you put a date in your diary where you are going to create the space and the time to do that thing? So the reframe is, instead of saying, I don't have time, replace that with, I haven't set a date yet. I haven't made the decision about when I'm going to do that thing. So how can I make a decision? What do I need to be able to make a decision to make that thing a priority, to actually put a date on it and say, this is a date I'm going to actually begin that thing, take that action, and actually do what I say I'm going to do. Now, this next one is the one that sometimes can hit the hardest because it comes from a place of love and wanting to give. And that's always the hardest part, I think, of being a scholarly mama, where you want to show up for different areas of your life. You love your career. You don't want to quit your career, but you also want to be present at home and also for yourself. So this one is, the myth is, how will everyone cope? And this is the question that you are asking before you've given anyone a chance to even begin to answer this. For me, I was thinking, how are we going to cope at work? Like, how is that going to work if I decide to reduce my hours? How is that going to work? I'm responsible for a small team. How are we going to navigate this, right? How are my kids going to manage if I start to delegate more tasks and actually do less? How is everybody going to manage? And I think the reason why this myth is so common is because it is coming from a place of care. Like, you genuinely want to do a good job, or you genuinely want to show up and express love in whatever way that you're doing that. You want to be helpful. You want to give of yourself. And it comes from a genuine place of love and responsibility. And that's what makes it really hard to challenge it, because you hold so much together. You are, the emotional anchor. You're the one who knows where everything is. You're the one who's making a lot of the decisions. You're the one who everybody needs, right? And the thought of stepping back from that feels like abandonment. It feels like you are, not showing up for your teammates or your family. Like you're not being there for everyone. But here's what I gently want to offer you. If this sounds familiar, if you have felt this before, where you felt like, oh my goodness, how is everyone going to manage if I choose myself and step back from certain responsibilities? Here's what I want to offer you. Here's a question that I had to ask myself. And maybe you may want to do this as well. Have I actually given them the opportunity to cope? Or have you just kept, convincing yourself that you've got to do it all, that you have to, keep this going, because if you don't, no one's going to be able to manage? Because I think that over functioning, overdoing can happen to the best of us, but it's often this under trusting other people where you're not giving others the opportunity to step up, to take responsibility. You're not delegating, you're not allowing people to take, control of things that maybe you did before. So this might look like the spouse who may figure it out if you weren't doing that particular activity, or the colleagues who are going to manage if you weren't there. The children who are actually more capable than you give them credit for, that they can actually show up. So this is not about abandoning your responsibilities. It's about asking, am I carrying things that other people could carry, and have I ever let them try to do so? So maybe this week, if this has been you, maybe this week, try choosing one thing that you always do and let someone else do it. See what happens. Doesn't mean that you never do it again, but just give other people the opportunity to step up and step in. Choosing yourself it's not saying anything bad about other people. It's not betraying other people. It's not, it's actually being a model for them. It's actually showing them that it's okay to choose yourself. The people in your life may even surprise you if you create the space for them to be able to do that. So the question to sit with is, who in my life might actually rise if I stop pulling them up or rising on their behalf? And finally, the fourth myth, the one that is always dressed up as ambition, but actually maybe fear. And that is, I cannot afford to not be available. I cannot afford to cut back, cannot afford to slow down. And maybe this is the opportunity cost that maybe you're thinking like, oh my goodness, if I step back, how am I gonna cope on less money? We've already talked about time and money, so hopefully that's landed. But sometimes we do get trapped in this thinking about, if we step back, how are we gonna cope on less money? How are we gonna survive? How are we gonna, how am I gonna progress in my career if I'm not always available? But there's an opportunity cost that you're not calculating. You might be thinking about opportunity cost as in, if I'm not always available, I'm not going to get, the next opportunity. I'm not going to get the next grant, the next thing. Like, how am I going to grow my career? But there is another kind of quiet opportunity cost that you're not thinking about. So we've all been sold this story that availability means commitment. I talked about this at the beginning of the episode, that always being reachable, always being responsive, always being present for everyone all the time is what high achievers do. It's just what we do, right? Because we get things done. And to step back from that feels like you're falling behind. It feels like you're giving other people, colleagues or competitors or what have you, some kind of advantage, right? It's almost like you are admitting that you cannot keep up if you step back. Like, oh my goodness, maybe I'm failing because I can't keep up. And I had all those thoughts. Believe me, I had all of those thoughts as well. But here's a question that we never ask. What is the opportunity cost of us burning out? Not the cost of stepping back and not getting the opportunities that come up at work or, wherever, but of the burnout itself. The research that didn't happen because you had nothing left to give. The papers that never materialized because you had nothing left in the tank. The conversations that didn't go deep because you were too tired to be present. The decisions made from fear and depletion that you would have made differently if you'd had the capacity, but you were just too tired. And the version of you, your creative, purposeful self that simply did not have the space to come back to life or to exist. Success does not live in your availability. It lives in your capacity, and we have to protect. Capacity requires opportunities to, recover and recharge and restore. It requires gaps and margins. It requires you to choose yourself sometimes before you can actually choose other people. And we say this all the time, it's so very cliche that we can't pour from empty cups, right? But more than that, I think you cannot think or lead or create from empty cups either. So the question to sit with is, what is my burnout actually costing me that I've not allowed myself to even calculate? What is the hidden cost of it? And so this isn't about quitting your career or walking away from your research or doing anything that is just not aligned with actually who you are as a person and who you are becoming, because these are parts of you that you enjoy and you love. What it isn't about as well is not about telling yourself that you can't be ambitious and you should just give up now. No, it's not about pretending that reclaiming your time and energy is an easy thing to do or that it's not a complex decision. It is. I have navigated all of these, right? But it's about asking honest questions about the stories that we are telling ourselves, the self-talk that we're having. It's about recognizing that survival mode doesn't have to be a permanent state of existing. That's a season that you can actually bring to an end. And you can have more agency over how long you actually stay in that. Like you can actually make that decision. And the goal isn't to do nothing. It's to do what matters from a place of wholeness rather than from a depleted state. So for those of you feeling like this is impossible, I hear you. And I want you to know, I literally thought the same thing, right? The shift doesn't always start with action. Like that comes later. Like I spent many, many months contemplating, overthinking, worried, fearful about what would happen if I made the decisions I wanted to make. Sometimes it just begins with a question, just calling something out. A crack in a belief that has been stagnant in our brains for such a long time has never been challenged. With a moment of going, hang on, what evidence do I have that that is true? Right? That may be enough. That's a start. So this for me is what self-leadership really looks like in practice. It's not the grand gestures, but it's an honest examination of the narratives that are driving our choices and our decisions. When you lead yourself gently and honestly, everything else can shift. You're not too much. You're not asking for too much. You're simply somebody who has been carrying a lot for a long time on the basis of some myths and stories that need to be questioned and challenged and changed. And you deserve more than living in survival mode. I'm going to leave it there for today, for this week. But if you have listened to this episode and something's landed for you, I want you to know that you are not alone. I have literally lived this in real time over the last year. And so the exhaustion is real. This is real. The desire for something different, you are entitled to have that desire. It is valid. But the fear of change is also understandable because that's what keeps us stuck. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for pressing play, for giving yourself this time today to just, even this is an act of self-leadership, to tune into this podcast, to listen, to reflect, but more importantly, to put into action. That's the part that's really important. Put into action what you are learning in this podcast. If you want to work with me beyond the podcast, you know where to find me. Head over to mrsmummyphd.com. And until next time, Mama, continue to lead yourself gently. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening. If something in today's conversation resonated with you, I want you to know this. You don't need to have it all figured out before you take your next step. This work is all about learning to lead yourself first in ways that honor your capacity, your work, your home, and yourself without burning out in the process. If you'd like to continue the conversation beyond the podcast, you're warmly invited to join Scholarly Mamas The Letter, a quiet monthly newsletter for mother scholars who value purpose beyond titles, presence at home, and peace within. You can sign up at scholarlymamas.com. And if you're feeling stuck, stretched, or just not where you want to be, you can book a free 30-minute call to help you gain clarity and explore what support might look like in this season to get from where you are to where you want to be. You can also connect with me on social media at Mrs. Mummy PhD, where I share reflections on ambition, motherhood, sustainable self-leadership, all the things for high-achieving mamas like yourself. This, Mama, is the quiet work of scholarly motherhood, and these are our journeys of becoming.